Hi, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with B'rith. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. A quick but important note before our interview, the B'rith podcast is now Conversations with B'rith. You'll be able to listen to and watch all of the programs wherever you get your podcasts, including on YouTube, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, and more. Now, if you enjoy this program, follow or subscribe to Conversations with B'rith wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate us too. We always appreciate the feedback. And of course, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for our latest content. Well, today I'll be speaking with Dr. Edita Gawron about B'rith's storied history in Poland before and leading up to World War II, in the larger context of Poland's Jewish history and the interconnectedness of Polish and Jewish histories going back centuries. Dr. Edita Gawron is an assistant professor at the Institute of Jewish Studies, part of the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and is a chair of the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure's Scientific Advisory Board. She's also president of the management board of the Galicia Jewish Heritage Institute Foundation, of the Galicia Jewish Museum, and since 2013, an expert for the European Commission. She previously served as the director of the Center for the Study of History and Culture of Krakow Jews from 2009 to 2017. Dr. Gawron is an expert on the 20th century history of Polish Jewry and Holocaust studies, as well as the contemporary Jewish diaspora. She has curated several exhibitions and museums, including Helena Rubinstein, First Lady of Beauty, at the Galicia Jewish Museum, and has authored dozens of works on the Holocaust and post-Holocaust history of the Jews in Poland, such as Revival and Rethinking Jewishness, the Challenges of Contemporary Jewish Communities in Central Europe. Dr. Gawron, welcome. We appreciate your being here.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
And good to see you again, because not too long ago, we had a chance to meet in Warsaw, where there was an important conference commemorating the 100th anniversary of B'rith in Poland. Well, let's start with how you got here, your journey. Tell us a bit about your background and what led you to focus on research on the modern Jewish history of Poland, which began in the late 19th century. And talk about your own hometown as it pertains to your interest in Poland's Jewish history, and whether its residents are interested in locating and preserving its Jewish heritage. Was there a Jewish community there when you were growing up? All of that in the first question.
It's a long story, but of course it's a pleasure to talk about how it started. When I was a teenager, I was really surprised not to learn too much from the textbook and from my teachers about the Jewish history of my hometown. So when starting my academic career or being a student and starting my research, I decided to focus on history, and I picked up the Jewish history, and my first work, and in fact my first book, was about the history of the Jewish community in my hometown. Its name is Warsaw. Its Yiddish name is Włoczewo, and it used to be quite a big shtetl before the Second World War, but unfortunately no proper community survived the Holocaust. There were only single families that survived and never reestablished the community after the war. So my research continues, and I've been living in Krakow for over 30 years. So now I'm working mostly on the history of Jews in Krakow.
Well, you've been involved in the planning of a number of Jewish museums. How did you become involved in that part of this very important work of history?
Yes, being a historian, being an academic, working at the university, I've noticed the shortage of the audience. I mean, we have the groups of students, but of course there is also a much wider audience available and ready to learn, ready to study outside of the university, especially in Krakow, when the Jewish history was rediscovered in the 1990s. And there was a group of guides, professionals who wanted to study whatever was related to the Jewish history of the city. And certainly there was no proper exhibition on the Jewish history in town, so several museums started to organize temporary exhibitions on the topic related to the Jewish community, both in Krakow and Galicia, a little bit wider spectrum of Jewish history and heritage. And that's how it started, being a historian, but also being involved in Galicia Jewish Museum. I was cooperating with other historians and curators on the first exhibitions. Then the Museum of the City of Krakow, the Historical Museum of the City of Krakow, organized few exhibitions devoted to the history of the Holocaust. And the story continues. And now I'm also on the board of several museums and hope that we will promote the Jewish history in the very best way possible.
Well, before we get to the history of B'nai B'rith in Poland and your research about it, I want to talk about research. The Jewish community in Poland before September 1st, 1939, or on September 1st, 1939, it's about 3.3 million Jews. Then you have the Holocaust, the war, communism in Poland until 1989. How much of the archival material, records, city records, municipal records, Jewish communal records, survived all of this war, tragedy, and turmoil?
Well, I cannot give you the exact percentage of the archival records that survive, but certainly depended on the location of the archives and the situation during the Second World War. Several archives, like the archive of the Jewish community in Krakow, were dispersed, relocated to other cities. And after the war, it was necessary to locate the parts of the archival materials and trying to move it back to the original location, or just to make sure that they are safe wherever they were. So we are talking now about the situation of some archives being completely destroyed, some archives being relocated, and some archives being fragmented. We also have to talk about the relocation outside of Poland. There are some documents, some records that were taken away or transported or exchanged, and they are today also abroad. So the archival materials devoted or relevant for the history of Jews in Poland are, I would say, almost everywhere. I mean, in Poland, in Europe, in the United States, in Israel, and even in Australia.
Are more and more of these documents emerging as time goes on? I mean, do you hear from somebody in another city, in another country, that has access to these documents or possesses them or has seen them?
Yes, this is a surprising process that even today, almost 80 years after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, we still find out the documents, and there are people who either discover or simply acknowledge the fact that they are in the possession of such documents. And we are talking about more formal documentation, but also very personal letters, photographs that were completely unknown before. And this is a very precious discovery, no matter what kind of topic and what kind of form it is. It's very surprising to find the whole books, memories, the whole folders of documentation, sometimes hidden in the attic or in the basement and discovered only during some construction works or selling the apartment or whatever other circumstances you can imagine.
Well, you've examined and written about the primary source documents from B'nai B'rith in Poland. The story of B'nai B'rith lodges within the Polish boundaries begins in the 1880s, long before the onset of World War I in what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire. How was B'nai B'rith established in Poland, and who were its members? And did the early Zionist movement play a part in leaders' agendas, or was the organization primarily focused on philanthropic endeavors and education?
The first lodges in Polish lands, not in the Polish state, because Polish state didn't exist at that time, were in fact located in the big cities with a high percentage of Jewish intelligentsia and Jewish entrepreneurs. And in fact, there were also the same towns, the same cities were quite known for the Zionist initiatives or the beginnings of the Zionist movement at the end of the 19th century. So we are talking about cities like Krakow, Lviv, or in the territory of then German or Prussia, Katowice. These are the locations of both the initial lodges of B'nai B'rith, but also the initial organizations of Zionist movement. So there was some overlap in the locations. And I think there was also a significant overlap in the members. When we look at the members of both B'nai B'rith and the Zionist organizations, we see at least in part the same leaders, and we also see the joint activities at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. But of course, the B'nai B'rith was very focused on philanthropic work, intellectual discussions, and supporting the cases for Jewish communities. So it was not only focused on things Zionist, absolutely not. There were a lot of initiatives that we can call educational and starting new institutions, organizations. That was part of the focus of B'nai B'rith lodges. When we look at especially two lodges, the one in Krakow and the one in Lviv, they were very specific because most of their members were fluent Polish speakers. So this also made them the first, as we call them, Polish Jewish lodges, unlike other lodges in Upper Silesia or Western territories. Even if they become part of Poland later on, the members registered the lodges and mostly spoke German.
What was the world of the Jewish communities at that time like? There must have been many, given the size of the population in the big cities. And of course, there were hundreds of communities, small Städtlach and villages, medium-sized cities. But there must have been kind of a teeming Jewish communal life in this period. Tell us a little about what would we have encountered in the Jewish communities had we lived at that time?
Well, absolutely. There was a lot of initiatives, a lot of diversity in these towns where the Jewish community was thriving before the Second World War. But we are talking about the beginning of the 20th century. Such cities like Krakow and Lviv, but also later on Warsaw, were known for their large percentage of Jewish population within the city's population. But they were also known for their diversity. So we have a lot of, on one hand, religious Orthodox organizations, and we have more and more attempts to establish secular political organizations within the cities within the regions. Of course, when we look at the religious life, it was becoming more and more diverse with the Orthodox community, with the progressive community, and with more and more prayer houses, little shtiblech that the Jews were feeling more comfortable than in big synagogues central in the city or central in the Jewish quarters. And of course, at the beginning of the 20th century, we see the increase of the increase in numbers of the political institutions, political organizations, political parties. So this is another dimension of Jewish life back then. On top of that, new initiatives, cultural, literary, sport activities that brought completely new aspects to Jewish life, almost unknown in the 19th century.
Well, let's return to B'nai B'rith. After World War I ended in 1918, borders of Poland were mapped, and Dr. Leon Adler would eventually become president of the Grand Lodge of B'nai B'rith in Poland. But District 13 was not officially established until 1922 or 1923. Actually, 1923, I guess, because we're now commemorating the 100th anniversary this year. What was the delay? What caused it?
It was the whole procedure of registering the institution, of going through the process of the administrative paperwork and registering the institution, but also getting the necessary permissions and checks from the local authorities. We have to remember that this was the initial stage of independent Poland after the First World War. There was a lot of uncertainty about certain organizations and certain initiatives. So the government, both central and local, was checking those new initiatives in the proper or even more than proper way. But this initiative was successful. The first talks about establishing a Polish lodge ended with the success, and the district was confirmed. And Mr. Adler, who was a successful lawyer, certainly played a crucial role in convincing local authorities.
Well, emulating Germany's District 8, and I should explain that B'nai B'rith internationally was organized on the basis of kind of geographical districts. So emulating Germany's District 8, District 13 boasted pioneering theologians, groundbreaking Jewish historians, some experts in ancient languages. Tell us about some of the members. Who were some of the more notable ones?
This was the whole spectrum of lawyers, intellectuals, historians, rabbis as well, but also entrepreneur. So the whole group of people who composed the leadership of B'nai B'rith in Poland. But of course, there were some most notable leaders that are both formally and informally visible in B'nai B'rith activities. Let me start from Krakow, because that's where I'm based. Certainly the key role, one of the key roles beside Leon Adler's was Rabbi Ozar Stone, who played the role of the Zionist leader, but he was also one of the activists supporting B'nai B'rith activities and strengthening the educational initiatives in Krakow. Beside him, there were people like Mojżesz Szor in Warsaw, Markus Brade, or Meir Balaban, the historians who were quite essential in establishing the Institute for Judaic Studies in Warsaw. And they were certainly not only the intellectuals in the academia work, but they were activists, political activists, strengthening the local Jewish communities and trying to educate the new generation of the Jews. I could mention many other names. If you basically look at the history of Polish Jews in the interwar period, most of the leaders of the Jewish communities were either leaders of B'nai B'rith, or they were supporting B'nai B'rith, or they were taking part in B'nai B'rith activities. So it was the elite of the Jewish community in Poland.
Schools with modern and traditional Jewish curriculum for both high school age and college students were founded and administered by B'nai B'rith leaders in Poland. Can you tell us about some of these schools and how they fulfilled the vision of scholars whom you mentioned, like Meir Balaban and Moses Shor? And what were their hopes for the next generation of Jewish people in Poland? And did this type of school set any kind of educational precedent?
So certainly the schools either established or supported by B'nai B'rith were focusing on multi-dimensional education or creating the open society, supporting the secular education that was not offered by way too many schools in the 19th century. So it certainly was the wider spectrum of education available in the schools, and working together with intellectuals and researchers who at the same time were professors or graduates of universities in Poland and abroad, made those schools known for their high level of education. And the students of such schools very often mentioned the level of discussions during the classes, that it was unheard of in other schools. So the high level of education was the priority, the access to well-equipped libraries, the international connections of such schools. This was also the priority, and supporting the students of high schools and secondary schools in joining the universities. This was also the process that demanded special guidance and special support from the teachers of the schools supported by B'nai B'rith. And we see the continuation at the university. I mentioned the Institute for Judaic Studies in Warsaw. In fact, the classes offered by Jewish professors were organized at Warsaw University, and Jewish students could join most of the classes supported by professors who happened to be the members of B'nai B'rith.
Despite the anti-Semitism that was prevalent in Poland leading up to World War II and earlier, cosmopolitan centers throughout the country were places where Jews were able to establish careers in the arts, including literature, cinema, theater, as well as in medicine and law, architecture, many other prestigious fields. But as the 1930s progressed, and as we know, the situation grew dire. In fact, the Polish government, before the Nazis, closed the B'nai B'rith lodges in 1938. Can the narrative of the deteriorating situation, which was underway, can you trace the surge in prejudice as you look at it now, looking back? Could we see, even before 1938, was the situation leading up to the ultimate curtain falling towards the end of 1938? Can we track that? Can we see that? Or did it just happen that ultimately they got around to B'nai B'rith and other organizations, and people couldn't necessarily see the worst coming?
I have to say that the closing of B'nai B'rith was not the first step that limited the autonomy of Jewish life in Poland. There were some events happening even before that, even prior to 1938, that either attempted or succeeded in limiting the access of Polish Jews to education or some rights as the citizens in the city. One of the very first cases that we see in the interwar period in Poland was the attempt to limit the number of Jewish students at the universities. Some of the universities started to introduce numerus clausus, the limited percentage of Jews at the universities. Some went even farther by introducing numerus nullus, which meant no access for Jews in certain faculties or universities. So this was already happening in the 1930s, prior to the events that led, for example, to the limitation of the access to shechita, the ritual slaughter, in 1936, and there was a long-lasting discussion in Polish Parliament about that. We had also the cases of boycotting Jewish businesses, limiting the time of their were functioning due to the compulsory closing of businesses on Sunday. So there were some cases of limiting the rights of individual Jews, but also Jewish organizations. All of that was happening in part influenced or inspired by what was happening in Germany in the Third Reich, but some of these initiatives were rather local initiatives supported by the right-wing political organizations and parties.
Well, we're going to come back to B'nai B'rith in a moment, B'nai B'rith today. But I'd like to briefly touch on your expertise in Holocaust education and what you describe as the game-changing impact of the film Schindler's List. What happened after the film was released in 1993, talking now, generally speaking, and also in Poland? And tell us more about the history of the museum that was opened in the Schindler factory in Krakow. It seems like it's a very appropriate place for a museum to be open.
The movie Schindler's List was, in its most part, filmed in Krakow before it was released here. So certainly the whole city was following the process of producing the movie. And at this stage, it already caused a lot of questions about the Jewish history of the city, about the history of the Holocaust, about the places that were that Steven Spielberg was focusing on, like the ghetto in Krakow or Plaszow camp nearby. So certainly this movie increased interest in all things Jewish in Krakow, in Poland, and being released, being shown internationally, convinced or inspired many people to visit Krakow. That put a lot of pressure on local community, especially on local educators, guides, and in general tourist market, to accommodate all the questions that were asked by the tourists. And since 1993, we can talk about millions of people who have visited the city because of Schindler's List. And I do not exaggerate, because we see how people ask about certain fragments of the film when they visit the places allegedly portrayed in the film. And there are numerous discussions about whether the location was real or not. So to make a long story short, this film put Krakow on the map of Jewish tourism, and it put Krakow on the map of anyone who was interested in the Jewish history of Polish Jews, Krakowian Jews in particular. It changed the infrastructure of the city. The tourists demanded, the whole new infrastructure, and also including the locations shown in the film, in the tourist guidebooks, in the tours that were offered by the agencies. So today, Krakow has the offer that includes not only the royal castle and the old town, but the area of the former ghetto, Schindler's factory, seems to be almost compulsory for every visitor. On the map of these tourist attractions, we also have Schindler's factory, which today is mostly the location in a few buildings that used to belong to Schindler's factory. And part of it, the administrative building, was turned into the historical museum, showing the Second World War. So the Nazi German occupation of the city of Krakow, and the story of Oskar Schindler is just part of it. Why the museum is not totally dedicated to Oskar Schindler and the story of the people he saved. As the curators, we realized that the wider story was needed, that you cannot only put the story of Oskar Schindler and over 1,000 of Jews he saved in the exhibition, because many visitors need the context. What did it mean to live in the city occupied by the Germans? What were the consequences of it? What were the relations of local population? And so on and so on. So this is the goal of this museum, to show this wider picture so people can understand what happened to the local Jews and why this extraordinary story of Schindler's factory is worth remembering and commemorating at the site.
How do you envision, or more specifically, what are your hopes for the future of Holocaust education and how it can have a positive effect on mitigating anti-Semitism and changing attitudes in your own country and around the world? The spike in anti-Semitism has become global. We see it everywhere. And it would be interesting to have your take on it, not only in terms of confronting contemporary anti-Semitism, but looking ahead. The further we remove ourselves from the Holocaust, the kind of territory that will be traversed in terms of Holocaust remembrance. So we'd like to have your thoughts on that.
Holocaust education certainly can help to make people more sensitive, not only to the history, but also to the events that are happening right now. We can use Holocaust history and educating about it as the platform to make people aware of certain processes, of how things started, how anti-Semitism was used as a political tool, how anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic propaganda could divide societies. So definitely learning certain facts, but also understanding processes that led to the Holocaust can help to hopefully prevent some of the similar events happening today. We see that Holocaust distortion and Holocaust denial today are rather on the rise. So this is also important to prevent this dangerous processes of denying the Holocaust or any negative distortions of the facts or elements of Holocaust history happening worldwide. We have to be alerted. We have to, I believe, as educators, as researchers, we have to remind again and again what happened, and hopefully we will contribute also to understanding certain dangerous actions today. Even recently, we could observe the cases of Holocaust denial and distortion. We see the war going on across the border from Poland. And one of the elements that it's used as the political weapon is denying history. It's this distortion of the history. So we cannot allow it to happen. We have to educate future generation.
Well, the challenge before us is all the more urgent as the number of survivors, just because of the biological clock, dwindles. And we have relied for all of these years on these first-person testimonies of those who experienced this barbarity. And so now, as we move even further away from the Holocaust, you're right. The burden on historians, on Jewish community leaders, on educators, is going to increase, and we have to be prepared to meet that challenge. Now, B'nai B'rith relaunched in Poland about 15 years ago. I was present for the relaunch in Warsaw. What can you tell us about its revival and about the revival of Jewish life in Poland?
B'nai B'rith definitely is part of the wide spectrum of Jewish activities and organizations in Poland today. And this revival of B'nai B'rith activities, it's certainly happening in like the whole chain of reviving other activities like religious diversity, like political activism, like social activism, and educational initiatives. This process started at the late of the 1980s, still during the communist time in Poland, but we can see the proper revival happening only since the 90s. It was possible thanks to the support of international Jewish organizations, including American Jewish organizations of all kinds that supported the revival of Jewish life, that educated local leaders how to establish the whole new infrastructure of Jewish life. And I believe B'nai B'rith is part of this infrastructure, essential part of the revival of Jewish life. Of course, this is also the platform for Jewish intelligentsia in Poland and for increasing the role of leaders, not only in the community, in the Jewish community, but also to be the voice of the community to more general Polish society and international society. So since 2007, we have this new organization, new old organization in Poland, revived or reestablished B'nai B'rith in Poland, but it's part of the process that continues. We still have new institutions being established, students' organizations that were opened not so long ago are part of this whole spectrum of Jewish life. So we are completing it.
And finally, how can people learn more about your work, Poland's modern Jewish history? Where can they go? Is there a website for your institute? Where should people go to find out more information on the kinds of things we've been discussing here today?
Most of the work is available online. We have the Institute of Jewish Studies at the Jagiellonian University website. We publish some new materials online. Some of the works are available at the website of Galicia Jewish Museum in Krakow, especially the information about the exhibitions and educational projects. Also, JCC Krakow is promoting all kind of local initiatives, and last but not least, anywhere on YouTube, social media, you can find lectures, articles, and chapters that were published either by me or my colleagues.
Well, Dr. Gavron, we're grateful for all of the important research that you've done on B'nai B'rith and the history and culture of Jews in Poland, and your dedication to Jewish studies and causes. We really value your efforts and appreciate your being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you again to my guest, Dr. Edita Gawron, for joining us, and to you for tuning in to our podcast, Conversations with B'nai B'rith. We hope you enjoyed what you've heard. If you did, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and share this episode with friends and others. For all of our latest content, and if you haven't already, follow or subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook. This is your host, Dan Mariaschin. Until next time, take care, everyone.